15 million people worldwide suffer a stroke every single year, and a shocking number of them had perfectly normal blood pressure the day before it happened. That 120/80 you cheer for at the doctor's office is only telling you half the story. We are going to break down the hidden math inside your blood pressure reading that actually predicts your stroke risk. By the end of this, you're going to know exactly how to calculate your own personal stroke risk number in about 5 seconds, using the receipt from your last doctor's visit. If you skip this, you might keep blindly trusting a medical system that often misses a massive ticking time bomb hiding in plain sight. Welcome back to 30-Day Health. If you're new here, hit subscribe because what you're about to hear is going to blow your mind. We are taught from a very young age that high blood pressure is the ultimate bad guy. You go to the doctor, they wrap that tight cuff around your arm, they pump it up until your hand goes numb, and then they read off 2 numbers. If those 2 numbers are below a certain threshold, you get a pat on the back, a clean bill of health, and you get sent on your way. You feel safe. You feel like your cardiovascular system is functioning exactly the way it should. But blood pressure is not just a random medical statistic on a chart. It is literally the physics of fluid moving through pipes. It is a highly dynamic, constantly changing measurement of force, resistance, and flow. To understand why healthy, active people who get a clean bill of health still suffer from sudden, catastrophic strokes, we have to completely change the way we look at those 2 numbers. We have to stop looking at them as a pass or fail grade and start looking at the relationship between them. Let's break down what those 2 numbers actually mean in the real world. The top number is your systolic blood pressure. This is the explosive force when your heart squeezes and pushes blood out into your body. Think of it as the maximum pressure in your plumbing system when the pump is running at full blast. The bottom number is your diastolic blood pressure. This is the resting pressure in the pipes when your heart relaxes between beats. It is the baseline tension in the system when the pump is momentarily turned off. For decades, the medical community was completely obsessed with the bottom number. Back in the middle of the 20th century, doctors barely paid attention to the top number at all. They thought that as you got older, it was completely natural for the top number to skyrocket. They believed your pipes simply got older and harder, so your heart had to pump harder to force the blood through. They called it essential hypertension because they thought it was absolutely essential for the body to do this just to keep blood flowing to the brain. Look at the history. When Franklin D. Roosevelt was the President of the United States, his blood pressure was regularly measured at numbers that would send you to the emergency room today. We are talking about readings like 220/120. His personal physicians wrote in their notes that he was in excellent health for a man of his age. They did not treat it. They did not try to lower it. They just let it ride because they believed the high top number was just a normal part of getting older. FDR eventually died of a massive stroke while sitting in a chair having his portrait painted. His blood pressure on the day he died was 300/190. That historical tragedy changed everything. It completely shifted the way we view the cardiovascular system. The medical world realized that high blood pressure was a killer, and they went to war against it. But in doing so, they created a new problem. They created the myth of the perfect average. Today, we are so hyper-focused on getting that top number down to 120 and that bottom number down to 80 that we ignore the mechanics of the blood vessels themselves. We treat the human cardiovascular system like a simple math equation. If your numbers average out to something normal, you are considered healthy. But averages lie to us all the time. Think about it like checking the air pressure in your car tires. You can put a gauge on the valve stem and read a perfect 35 psi. By all mathematical standards, that tire is perfectly inflated. But what if the rubber on that tire is 20 years old? What if it is dry rotted, cracked, and completely stripped of its flexibility? The pressure inside might be perfect, but the vessel holding that pressure is a stiff, brittle shell just waiting to hit a pothole and blow out. That is exactly what happens in the human body. You can have a blood pressure reading of 140/60, and your doctor might look at that and say, well, the top number is slightly high, but the bottom number is nice and low. So overall, it is not too bad. They might even prefer that over a reading of 135/85. because the 140/60 looks like a lower overall average burden on the heart. But wait until you see what actually happens inside your neck when that bottom number drops too low. When your diastolic pressure, that resting bottom number, drops incredibly low while the top number stays high, it creates a unique and terrifying physical environment inside your arteries. Your heart actually feeds itself with oxygen during the resting phase. The coronary arteries, which wrap around the outside of your heart muscle and supply it with blood, fill up while the heart is relaxed. If that bottom resting pressure drops too low, there is not enough baseline force to push blood into the heart muscle itself. Your heart can literally starve for oxygen while it is aggressively pumping blood to the rest of your body. And this brings us to the massive hidden secret hiding in plain sight on your medical chart. For decades, doctors thought only the bottom number mattered. Then they decided only the top number mattered. Now, we know they were looking at the wrong end of the equation entirely. The true danger is not the top number. It is not the bottom number. It is the gap between them. This gap is called your pulse pressure. This is the one number you actually need to care about, and finding it is incredibly simple. You just subtract your bottom number from your top number. That is it. That is the entire math equation. If your blood pressure is 120/80, you subtract 80 from 120. Your pulse pressure is 40. A normal, healthy pulse pressure sits right around 40 millimeters of mercury. This means there is a 40-point jump in pressure every time your heart beats. Your arteries experience a smooth, manageable wave of force. But what happens when that gap widens? What happens when your top number is 140 and your bottom number drops to 60? You subtract 60 from 140, and you get a pulse pressure of 80. This is a massive red flag for cardiovascular events, regardless of what the individual numbers are. Anything over 60 is considered a wide pulse pressure, and it is a ticking time bomb for a stroke. If you're already realizing your last doctor's visit didn't give you the whole story, do me a favor and hit subscribe. We do deep dives like this all the time to help you actually understand your body. To understand why a wide pulse pressure is so dangerous, you have to visualize the physics of water moving through a hose. When your pulse pressure is a healthy 40, your heart is pushing blood through the arteries in a smooth, continuous wave. The arteries expand slightly to absorb the force, and then they gently squeeze back down to keep the blood moving forward while the heart rests. It is a beautiful, highly efficient system. But when your pulse pressure widens out to 70 or 80, the physics completely change. It is no longer a smooth push of water. It is the exact equivalent of taking a heavy metal hammer and violently striking the inside of a water pipe every single second of every single day. A low bottom number is not always a good thing. If your top number is 130, which most doctors would say is totally fine for an older adult, but your bottom number drops to 50, your pulse pressure is a dangerous 80. Your heart is basically taking a massive running start and violently slamming a wall of blood into an unyielding wall of tissue. The difference in pressure between the rest and the squeeze is so extreme that it creates a destructive shockwave. And this is where the math gets genuinely scary for people who think they are perfectly healthy. Why does this gap widen in the first place? Why would the top number go up while the bottom number goes down? The answer comes down to one of the most dangerous silent killers in the human body: arterial stiffness. When you are young, your blood vessels are not just hollow plastic tubes. They are living, breathing, incredibly dynamic organs. The walls of your arteries are packed with a protein called elastin. Just like the name sounds, elastin makes your arteries stretchy. They are soft, flexible, and highly compliant. When your heart beats and blasts a massive volume of blood out of the left ventricle, it travels straight into your aorta. The aorta is the largest artery in your body. It is shaped like a candy cane, coming right out of the top of the heart and plunging down through your chest and abdomen. In a healthy person, the aorta acts like a second heart. When that violent blast of blood hits it, the stretchy elastin allows the aorta to balloon outward. It expands to catch the blood, completely absorbing the violent shock of the heartbeat. Then, while the heart is resting and refilling for the next beat, the aorta slowly and smoothly recoils back to its original size. This elastic recoil acts like a secondary pump, gently squeezing the blood forward so there is a constant, steady flow to your organs even when the heart is completely relaxed. This is called arterial compliance. Think of it like a brand new rubber band. You can stretch it easily, it absorbs the energy, and it snaps right back into shape. But as we age and as we live modern lifestyles full of stress, poor food, and lack of movement, the structure of our blood vessels physically changes. The stretchy elastin starts to break down and degrade. It gets replaced by a different protein called collagen. Collagen is tough. It is rigid. It is the same stuff that makes up your tendons and scars. On top of that, calcium starts to deposit in the walls of the arteries, literally turning them to stone. Your beautiful, flexible aorta turns from a soft rubber tube into a stiff, calcified lead pipe. It is exactly like an old, crusty rubber band you find in the back of a junk drawer. The second you try to pull it, it fights back. It does not stretch. It just threatens to snap. When your aorta becomes stiff, it can no longer balloon outward to absorb the shock of the heartbeat. So, when the left ventricle fires, that entire violent blast of high-pressure blood has nowhere to expand. It slams into the rigid walls of the aorta, and the pressure instantly spikes. That is why your top number, the systolic pressure, goes up. But because the aorta is stiff, it also cannot recoil. It loses that secondary squeezing action that keeps the blood moving while the heart rests. The pressure instantly drops like a rock the second the heart stops pushing. That is why your bottom number, the diastolic pressure, plummets. The top number shoots through the roof, the bottom number falls through the floor, and your pulse pressure widens into a massive, dangerous gap. This stiffening does not just happen overnight. It happens slowly, silently, over decades. You do not feel it. You do not wake up with a stiff aorta and think, wow, my blood vessels feel rigid today. You feel completely fine. You might even go for a run, eat a salad, and feel like you are in the best shape of your life. But every time your heart beats, it is generating a violent shockwave that travels outward from the chest. Because the aorta can no longer absorb that shockwave, the energy has to go somewhere. The physics dictate that the force will travel along the path of least resistance. And unfortunately, that path leads directly up your neck and straight into your brain. To understand how a high pulse pressure physically causes a stroke, we have to look at the plumbing inside your head. The human brain is a massive energy hog. It weighs only about 2% of your total body weight, but it demands 20% of your blood supply. To deliver all that blood, the brain is packed with a vast, dense network of tiny blood vessels called the microvasculature. These vessels are microscopic. They are incredibly thin, highly fragile, and deeply sensitive. They are designed to receive a smooth, gentle, continuous flow of blood. They are completely unequipped to handle high pulsatility blood flow. They are not built to withstand shockwaves. Imagine taking an industrial power washer, hooking it up to a fire hydrant, and aiming it directly at a fragile, delicate sea sponge. That is exactly what a wide pulse pressure does to your brain. Every single time your heart beats, roughly 100,000 times a day, a violent hammer strike of pressure bypasses your stiff aorta, shoots up your carotid arteries, and blasts directly into the fragile microvessels of your brain. The craziest part? The fix for this is actually completely backward from what most people guess. But before we talk about how to fix it, we have to look at the damage this power washer effect actually causes. Over time, these tiny vessels in the brain start to take a beating. The violent pulsing causes the walls of these microvessels to thicken as a defense mechanism. They get inflamed. Eventually, they become so damaged that they simply snap, or they get so thick that they completely close off. When one of these tiny vessels shuts down, a microscopic piece of brain tissue starves of oxygen and dies. This is called a microinfarct, or a silent stroke. Wide pulse pressure does not just predict the massive, catastrophic strokes that paralyze half your body and put you in a wheelchair. It actively causes millions of these microscopic silent strokes. You do not even know you are having them. You do not get a drooping face or slurred speech. You might just feel a little more tired. You might walk into a room and forget why you went in there. You might struggle to find a specific word during a conversation. If you take a brain scan of someone with a wide pulse pressure, You will often see something called white matter hyperintensities. These look like tiny glowing white spots scattered all throughout the brain. Each one of those spots is a tiny graveyard of dead brain cells caused by the relentless, violent pounding of a stiff arterial system. Over decades, these silent strokes accumulate. They eat away at your cognitive reserve. The damage builds and builds until the brain can no longer compensate, and you cross the threshold into vascular dementia. All because the gap between your two blood pressure numbers was too wide, and nobody told you it was a problem. If this is hitting home for you right now, maybe you're thinking of a parent or grandparent, hit that like button. It helps get this exact warning in front of more people who really need to hear it. We know all of this is true because of some of the most massive, longest-running medical studies in human history. Let's look at the Framingham Heart Study. This was a legendary research project that started all the way back in 1948 in the town of Framingham, Massachusetts. Researchers recruited over 5,000 men and women and simply watched them live their lives for decades, tracking every possible metric of their cardiovascular health. Fast forward to the late 1990s and early 2000s, and scientists started digging deep into the decades of data they had collected. They wanted to know which blood pressure number was the actual best predictor of someone having a heart attack or a stroke. What they found completely shattered the traditional medical view. They discovered that in adults over the age of 50, pulse pressure was a vastly superior predictor of coronary heart disease and stroke than either the systolic or the diastolic pressure alone. Let that sink in. The gap between the numbers was a louder alarm bell than the numbers themselves. The Framingham data showed that for every 10-point increase in pulse pressure, the risk of major cardiovascular complications shot up by a massive percentage. They found people who had isolated systolic hypertension. This is a specific condition where the top number is high, but the bottom number is perfectly normal or even low. Imagine a 55-year-old marathon runner. He eats clean, he runs 30 miles a week, he is lean, and he feels fantastic. He goes to the doctor and his blood pressure is 145/70. His doctor looks at the chart and says, "Well, your top number is a little elevated, but your bottom number is fantastic. You are a runner, your heart is strong. We will just watch it. Keep doing what you are doing." That doctor just missed the ticking time bomb. If you do the math, 145 minus 70 equals a pulse pressure of 75. That is incredibly high. That means this healthy, active marathon runner has the aorta of an 80-year-old. His arteries are completely stiff. Every single time his heart beats, especially when he is out running and his heart rate is elevated, he is blasting a high-pressure shockwave directly into his brain, damaging his microvasculature. He is a prime candidate for a sudden stroke, and the standard medical advice was to just watch it. This happens every single day in clinics all over the world. People are sent home with a false sense of security because their bottom number looks good, dragging their average down to a place that makes the doctor comfortable. I'll show you exactly how to fix that stiff rubber band in a second. But first, we need to understand why the standard medical treatment often fails these exact people. If you have a wide pulse pressure and you get put on a standard blood pressure medication, like a beta blocker or a diuretic, the drug does exactly what it is designed to do. It lowers your blood pressure. But here is the catch. These drugs usually lower both numbers at the same time. Let's say you start with a blood pressure of 160/80. Your pulse pressure is 80. You take a pill, and the drug lowers your top number by 20 points, and your bottom number by 20 points. Your new reading is 140/60. The doctor claps their hands and says, "Great job. The medicine is working. Your top number is out of the extreme danger zone." But look at the math. 140 minus 60 is still 80. Your pulse pressure hasn't changed a single bit. The gap is exactly the same. The hammer is still smashing into the pipes. The shockwave is still hitting your brain. And even worse, you have now driven your bottom number down to 60, which means your resting pressure is dangerously low, and your own heart muscle might not be getting enough oxygen during the resting phase. You cannot just take a standard blood pressure pill to magically fix arterial stiffness. You cannot medicate your way out of a physical structural breakdown of the artery wall. You have to literally rebuild the pipes from the inside out. Real quick, if you're getting value out of this breakdown, drop a comment below with your aha moment so far. Okay, let's look at how we actually fix this. To repair a stiff artery, we have to focus all of our attention on something called endothelial function. The endothelium is a microscopic, one-cell thick layer that lines the entire inner surface of your blood vessels. For a long time, scientists thought this was just a biological wrapper, like the plastic casing on a sausage. But we now know the endothelium is one of the most active, intelligent, and critical organs in the human body. These tiny cells act like the command center for your arteries. They constantly monitor the blood flowing past them, feeling the pressure, sensing the chemicals, and responding in real time. When they sense that the artery needs to open up and relax, the endothelial cells manufacture a miracle molecule called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a gas. The moment it is created, it diffuses rapidly into the smooth muscle cells that surround the artery wall, and it commands those muscles to instantly relax. This causes the blood vessel to dilate, which drops the pressure, restores flexibility, and completely cushions the shockwave of the heartbeat. If you want to close the gap on your pulse pressure, you have to become obsessed with increasing your body's production of nitric oxide. You have to heal the endothelium so it can do its job. The absolute fastest way to do this is through your diet. Specifically by feeding your body raw materials, it can convert into nitric oxide. The most powerful source of this is dietary nitrates, which are heavily concentrated in beets and dark leafy green vegetables like spinach, arugula, and kale. But here is a massive secret about how this actually works. You do not just digest these nitrates in your stomach. The process actually starts in your mouth. When you chew a piece of spinach or drink beet juice, the natural nitrates mix with specific, friendly bacteria that live on the surface of your tongue. These bacteria literally eat the nitrates and convert them into nitrites. When you swallow your saliva, those nitrites hit the acid in your stomach and are instantly converted into nitric oxide, which floods into your bloodstream and forces your stiff arteries to relax. This means that if you use harsh alcohol-based mouthwashes that nuke the bacteria in your mouth, you are actively destroying your body's ability to produce nitric oxide. You are physically making your blood vessels stiffer just by gargling with chemicals. You have to protect your oral microbiome if you want to protect your arteries. The second massive lever you can pull to fix arterial stiffness is a very specific type of exercise. I am not talking about heavy weightlifting, which actually spikes your blood pressure in the short term. And I am not talking about extreme, high-intensity interval training that leaves you gasping for air on the floor. I am talking about steady, prolonged Zone 2 cardio. This is exercise where your heart rate is elevated, but you can still hold a conversation. Think of a brisk walk, a light jog, or riding a stationary bike at a moderate pace for 45 minutes. Why does this work? It all comes back to the physics of plumbing. When you do steady-state cardio, you vastly increase the volume of blood rushing through your arteries. As this blood flows rapidly over the endothelial cells, it creates physical friction. In fluid dynamics, this is called shear stress. Your endothelial cells love shear stress. When they feel that constant, smooth rush of blood rubbing against them, it acts like a massive biological signal. The cells panic in a good way, thinking, "We need to make more room." They start pumping out massive amounts of nitric oxide to widen the vessel. But it gets even better. When you expose your arteries to this shear stress regularly, week after week, the body actually starts to physically rebuild the artery wall. It clears out the stiff collagen and starts laying down fresh, stretchy elastin. You are literally rehabbing your blood vessels, turning them from crusty old rubber bands back into fresh, flexible tubes. The arteries become soft again. The aorta regains its ability to absorb the shockwave. The top number comes down, the bottom number comes up, and that dangerous pulse pressure gap closes. The final step in fixing this hidden number is stopping the damage that is making the arteries stiff in the first place. You have to stop eating the things that are actively crusting your blood vessels. The biggest culprit here is a chemical reaction that happens when you combine highly processed sugars with proteins in your bloodstream. This creates compounds called advanced glycation end products, appropriately known by the acronym AGEs. AGEs are incredibly destructive. When you eat a diet high in processed foods, deep-fried garbage, and refined sugars, these AGEs flood your bloodstream. They act like biological superglue. They seek out the flexible elastin proteins in your artery walls and bind to them, physically cross-linking the fibers so they can no longer stretch. They literally caramelize your blood vessels from the inside out. If you want to save your brain from the relentless pounding of a wide pulse pressure, you have to cut the processed sugars and the deep-fried foods that are actively gluing your arteries shut. You have to replace them with foods that fuel the endothelium. You have to move your body in a way that generates the healing friction of shear stress. The human body is an absolute masterpiece of engineering. It does not just break down randomly without warning. It always leaves clues. It always gives you signs that the system is under strain. For 15 million people this year, the final sign will be a devastating stroke that changes their life forever, or ends it entirely. But for millions of them, the clue was sitting right there on their medical chart for years, hiding in plain sight. They had the numbers. They just did not know how to do the math. Now, you do. You know that 120 over 80 is not the end of the story. You know that the gap between the squeeze and the rest tells the true tale of how much damage your brain is taking every single second. The next time you get your blood pressure checked, do not just listen for the average. Ask for the specific numbers. Do the simple second-grade subtraction right there in the office. Top minus bottom. If that number is creeping up towards 60, you know exactly what is happening inside your chest. You know the rubber band is getting stiff. You know the shockwave is hitting the fragile sponge. But more importantly, you now have the exact tools to fix the plumbing before the pipe bursts. You have the knowledge to rebuild your vessels, restore the flexibility, and quiet the pounding hammer inside your arteries. The math is in your hands, and your body is ready to heal the second you give it the right environment.